In 1707, Emperor Aurangzeb Alamgir died. He had ruled for nearly half a century, and at his death, his borders reached their absolute greatest extent. To outside observers, the Mughal state appeared as a machine of immense liquid assets and endless taxation. But maps lie. Territory only translates to power if it can be controlled, and this massive expansion had already hollowed out the state. The treasury was drained, and the provincial administration was cracking under the weight of its own borders. Mughal authority buckled under its own weight. The administrative machinery had been outpaced by the sheer speed of territorial expansion. Aurangzeb left his successors an empire fracturing from within, its institutions stretched to the point of collapse. The root of that collapse began on the rugged Deccan Plateau. Aurangzeb spent 25 years here, committing massive military resources to unify the subcontinent. Mughal warfare relied on scale, massive armies, and clear lines. This failed against the Marathas. They avoided decisive battles, using rough terrain to constantly chip at the Imperial army. Aurangzeb moved his court south, but extended supply lines became easy targets for fast cavalry. The Mughals would spend vast sums to capture a single hilltop fort, only to lose control of the surrounding countryside. Conquest cost more than it yielded. The Deccan campaign became a tactical trap. By pursuing absolute territorial control at any price, the empire bankrupted itself. As the treasury drained in the south, the political center began to break. Great empires fail when the load-bearing alliances that built them fracture. A century earlier, Emperor Akbar built a stable blueprint. He integrated diverse regional elites, convincing local powers they had a profitable place inside the empire. Aurangzeb replaced that flexibility with strict centralization. To fund his wars, he pushed for orthodox control, alienating crucial military partners like the Rajputs, who had historically been the backbone of Mughal power. This shift peaked with the reimposition of the jizya, a tax on non-Muslim subjects. Its actual financial return was limited, but it sent a clear political signal. The empire was no longer a shared enterprise. Authority without cooperation requires constant military enforcement, a cost that the hollowed-out treasury could no longer carry. Regional powers stopped protecting the central throne and began prioritizing their own local survival. When Aurangzeb died, he left behind an exhausted military, a drained treasury, and a power vacuum spanning the subcontinent. Regional governors and warlords stopped answering to Delhi. They began hoarding tax revenues to build their own independent fiefdoms. The first consequence of this collapse arrived in 1739. The Persian ruler Nadir Shah marched his army into a divided, politically paralyzed Delhi. He sacked the city and stripped away the state's remaining reserves of gold and jewels, including the legendary Peacock Throne. That raid broke the back of central Mughal authority. This shattered, bankrupt landscape invited an entirely different kind of power from across the sea, the British East India Company. The company encountered a collection of fragmented states. They exploited the chaotic environment the Mughals had created, using the old imperial strategy of local alliances to buy and conquer the pieces of the subcontinent one by one. The pursuit of absolute control over the Deccan had achieved the opposite of its goal. It created the perfect conditions for a foreign corporation to swallow a continent. In 1707, the Emperor Aurangzeb died. The massive Mughal state he left behind didn't suddenly collapse or vanish overnight. Instead, it slipped into a highly dangerous vacuum. For centuries, absolute power had radiated from the throne, but the empire lacked one crucial piece of administrative machinery, a predictable mechanism for peaceful succession. Without a system, the only things that dictated who inherited the crown were personal ambition and the loyalty of the military. Almost immediately, brothers turned their weapons against brothers. These constant, violent civil wars rapidly drained the imperial treasury dry. Worse, every temporary victory and defeat taught the outer provinces a terrifying lesson. The emperor could bleed. Decades of infighting completely warped the nature of the throne. It morphed from a seat of lifelong absolute authority into temporary office space. Rulers appeared, sat for a few months or years, and vanished. Real authority abandoned the palace.
It shifted behind the curtains, settling into private noble factions. Figures like the Said brothers emerged as ultimate kingmakers. They treated the men on the throne as pawns they could elevate or discard at will. Yet from the outside, the machinery of state appeared entirely intact. Governors still spoke respectfully of Delhi, and official orders still carried the imperial seal. We can see this illusion maintained on the currency of the era. This gold coin, with its intricate sun motif and elegant calligraphy, continues to project the image of a fully functioning, immensely wealthy government. But immense wealth, masking severe administrative weakness, creates an irresistible beacon. The empire was rich, fractured, and exposed. By the 1730s, Nadir Shah of Persia looked toward the subcontinent and saw a spectacularly wealthy state entirely incapable of organizing its defense. He marched his forces east. The Mughals responded by assembling an enormous, highly prestigious army at Karnal. On paper, their numerical superiority should have easily crushed the invasion. Looking at this battlefield organization reveals the fatal rot. Command was fractured among independent nobles who refused to coordinate. Nadir Shah countered with sharp, concentrated force. His disciplined units sliced rapidly through the disorganized Mughal clusters, systematically breaking them apart. Karnal proved that centuries of royal prestige and raw manpower will always crumble when thrown against disciplined, unified maneuverability. The battlefield defeat rapidly gave way to the occupation of Delhi. What began as a tense but controlled entry suddenly erupted into sheer panic, widespread violence, and systematic extraction. Nadir Shah's forces unleashed a massive wave of looting. Generations of accumulated wealth were stripped from the vaults and violently moved west. Among the looted cargo were the Peacock Throne and the Koh-i-Noor diamond. These objects were designed specifically to project eternal Mughal sovereignty. Physically prying the diamond from the capital and carrying it to Persia sent a clear message. The ultimate symbols of power had been taken. The financial extraction severely damaged the imperial treasury, but losing the capital's sacred symbols delivered a fatal psychological blow. The illusion of untouchability was permanently shattered. Following the sack of Delhi, regional governors realized they no longer needed to wait for orders from a broken capital. The empire officially continued, but mostly as a memory. Looking at this map of the period, the deep territorial fragmentation becomes obvious. The subcontinent solidified into separate states under local nizams and nawabs, each retaining their own distinct borders, local armies, and tax revenues. Into this traumatized, fractured landscape arrived an entirely different type of entity, not a rival kingdom or a foreign emperor, but a quiet corporation. The British East India Company didn't arrive with massive conquering armies. They landed softly. They lent money to local rulers, secured highly specific trading privileges, and steadily built out their influence through commercial outposts. The Mughal state had unwittingly divided itself into a massive market of localized, easily acquirable pieces. Eventually, the East India Company militarized. When they did, they brought a new set of advantages built entirely on structured finance, professional administration, and reliable logistics. The company approached warfare the same way it approached a ledger. Every regional succession dispute became a capital investment. Every unpaid debt became an opportunity for territorial leverage. Unlike chaotic local armies, the company deployed strict infantry geometry, rigid blocks projecting overlapping, standardized firing arcs. Moving with accounting-like predictability, they systematically absorbed local states. One contract, one default, one battlefield at a time, folding independent territories into their rigid grid. Because the conquest was slow, gradual, and strictly contractual, it masked its own danger. By the time many local rulers realized they were losing their sovereignty, they were already locked strictly inside the company's legal and financial system. The Mughal Empire did not fall to a massive foreign army breaking down its doors. It fractured its own administration, unlocked its own gates, and was quietly, systematically acquired.